everyone. I was going to say good morning, everyone, but it's not morning. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I am a licensed psychologist. I am also the executive director at A Healing Paradigm. I am so excited to have my sister colleagues today as we get ready to have this important discussion on a topic that is dear to my heart in terms of the work that I am doing. If you are here for continuing education, I want to say a couple of things. First, if you haven't done so already, I see a couple of people have checked in. Do me a favor, check in the chat so we know that you are here. Even if you are not here for continuing education, go ahead and say hello in the chat so we know that we have that energy going back and forth. That's what just makes this exciting in terms of this process to be able to connect to our sisters in the broader global African community. Also, if you are someone that is here for continuing education, remember that you need to participate throughout. You need to stay for the entire session. At the end of the session, you will get an email from Beza Fakata. She will send you an evaluation, and then it also has information in there. Hey, Sister Dorleen, good to see you. In that evaluation, there is information that is relevant to the workshop that you will see today. So just make sure that you fill that out. You will have 30 minutes after this session is over to fill that out, and then you will receive your continuing education credit. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. I don't want to waste any time for this exciting topic. We are going to kind of do like a sister circle experience today. So I want to start by introducing my colleague, who is Dr. Jamila Codrington. She is a licensed psychologist, and she is in New York. She is in the city in New York. She specializes in working with children and also working with women of African ancestry, specifically around African dance and looking at traditional West African dance as a therapeutic method in terms of the healing work for women of African ancestry. Dr. Codrington has over 30 years of experience as a traditionally trained West African dancer. So I want to thank Dr. Codrington for being here and participating in this conversation. Thanks, Dr. Codrington.
Peace, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Ojelade, for convening us today and the wonderful introduction. I will now introduce Dr. Drmaatelewis, who is also based in New York, a fellow counseling psychologist like myself, board certified in African-centered psychology, and also, which is very central to today's dialogue, initiated in Egyptian yoga and the certification in breathwork and spiritual guidance. So thank you, Dr. Lewis, for being with us today.
Thank you for that introduction. And so I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade, who is the executive director of A Healing Paradigm and the host of this wonderful session tonight. She is not only a psychologist, but as I said, a owner of A Healing Paradigm, which provides a variety of psychological support services, testing to really help people of African descent reach the mental health services and make them more accessible. She is an author, and she has written a book, Sacred Healing Journey, Soul Food for Survivors of Abuse. And hopefully, not hopefully, she will say a little bit about that as we talk and share tonight. Her focus really is on also being a transformational speaker and assisting people globally to heal in order to take their careers and all their personal lives and relationships to the next level. She hosts conferences around the world and brings people together, not just on the continent of the US, but all throughout the African diaspora. As you know, tonight's program is about healing our sisters, and Dr. Ojelade, along with her staff at A Healing Paradigm, produce many programs along these lines of working on indigenous and traditional African healing modalities. So, Dr. Ojelade.
Thank you. So I was thinking we should start out with our first question. It's just like, why don't we just talk about what it is that we do and why do we specifically do that? Because each of us is trained in a Western formal training of Western psychology, but we focus very heavily on integrating African kind of traditional wisdom, spiritual practices, in turn, ritualistic practices and what we do. So let's just talk about why do we do that. So whoever wants to go first.
So I can start. So I want to give some credit. So why do I do what I do? I do breath work. I do traditional African meditation practices, also known as Egyptian yoga and Kemetic yoga. And the breath work part of what I do started, and the reason I got into it actually was because of the Association of Black Psychologists. In 2001, at a Black Psychology convention, I had the life-changing opportunity to attend a breath workshop. And that process for me aided in the release of old emotions. It helped to expand the states of my consciousness and awareness. And it also helped me to sort of enhance and release sort of energy that was held in my body from trauma and years of stress. And so having that experience, I was moved to further learn about African practices around breath and meditation, and really immerse myself in two things. One, breathwork practice. So I did an extensive training for 3 years, practicing breath and meditation and learning the technique of doing intensive breath meditation practice. And then I also was initiated in the Egyptian yoga tradition. And for about the last 19 years, have been a practitioner of Egyptian yoga and integrated that work into my practice, as a psychologist.
What about you, Dr. Codrington?
So interestingly enough, my journey starts back in childhood. And if you ask me when I was about 6, what I would be doing when I grew up, and if I would be combining traditional African dance and drum with healing as a psychologist, I would have been blown. I wouldn't have seen that as my trajectory. But what happened for me was I was introduced to traditional West African dance and drum through my mother. My mother, Sewa Codrington, has always grounded myself and my nuclear family in traditional African cultural practices. And she's a dancer and she's an educator. And so I grew up, going to dance classes, after school on weekends. We would go to listen to the drums. We would go to dance. I learned dance by going to her rehearsals because she was always in various performing arts companies. I started performing while I was 8, and I stayed true to doing African dance until I went off to college and got into athletics. But then once I nailed down what I wanted to do professionally, which was the field of psychology, I never really knew that I would arrive back at where I started at age 8 until I also went into the Association of Black Psychologists. And that professional organization became a second family and really helped me to understand what it meant to decolonize my own education and think about the things that are true to who we are as people of African descent, and feel comfortable bringing them in to the therapy process and the healing process. So I started presenting. Dr. Mark Bolden would often contribute to the process of bringing in the African cultural arts. We would present together. We had Dr. Alana Johnson. We would often have these symposiums and workshops around the use of traditional African dance and drum and other cultural arts. And then I started doing some writing, and it began to feel less like I was bringing in this separate part of myself into my professional realm, but just doing sort of like a shedding process of who I was and being able to understand that it's all one continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And now the work is done in healing circles. The work is done with writing. Last year, we actually at the ABSI convention with the concept of Afrofuturism, really looked at bringing in science, not to legitimize what we do, but to really be able to think about how we could elevate our understanding of what's happening in the brain while people are engaging in traditional African drumming. So we actually had a whole piece where we hooked up Baba Ogunide, who was a part of the symposium, to a neurofeedback system and measured the brain waves. And so it's taking so many different twists and turns, and it's really just at the heart of who I am. And I really am looking forward to sharing it with everybody today.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the baby because I came along after the two of you. But it was ABSI for me, the Association of Black Psychologists, that helped me to really, I think what you just said, Dr. Codrington, began to decolonize psychology. Like I always knew something was wrong. I've been in political activism circles since I was 19. And so I came to psychology with already kind of a perspective of social justice. And I had already been initiated in terms of an ancestral society, in terms of West African tradition here in the US. And I wasn't really sure how to integrate those things with psychology. But when I was sitting classes, I would know that the stuff that I was hearing wasn't right. And it wasn't going to be the stuff that was going to heal our people. And particularly when I was in like practicum, so like doing training experiences, and sometimes I would try something that felt more comfortable, and that would be the stuff that the clients would resonate to. And I remember one time being told, well, you realize the work that you're doing ancestral work. And I was like, oh, but I didn't know what to do with that. And then when I came to ABSI, I remember sitting in your sessions, Dr. Lewis, and I would follow you around. I always say that I would follow you around like, to all your sessions to figure out, like, what is this? How are they talking about this? How are they doing this? And so for the two of you, I remember just having this sense of, oh, I can see that they're doing something. They understand something that I need to understand. There's something that I need to learn in this process. And so a lot of what I do as a psychologist now, I do understand, is ancestral work. That's where the work specifically lies for me, is how do we heal in terms of ancestral lineage, looking at things from a spiritual perspective. And even when I did my dissertation work, all the research that I was doing was really from that perspective. And I was really shocked because for my dissertation, they let me do that stuff. And I wasn't at a school where any of that stuff was acceptable. But I say it's ancestral intervention because they were like, all right, you can do it.
And do you find that that's been a lot of your experience, Dr. Ojelade, that things have just sort of evolved or unfolded, and opportunities to really sort of be with the African-centered view and perspective have just opened up?
Mm-hmm. I mean, definitely in a lot of different ways. I mean, and I can use the two of you as examples in terms of what you do. A couple of years ago, you invited me to breath work in New York. And I remember my first thought was, we're going to breathe for 8 hours. And the only reason I went is because I like you. And I just was like, I don't know what we're going to do for 8 hours. How are we going to breathe for 8 hours? And I had one brief experience that I think I just wasn't ready for it. And then I went and I experienced breath work, and it was literally life-changing for me. And it wasn't that we breathe and we do breathe, but it wasn't an 8-hour process. And I had to let go of a lot of stuff that I had held on to. And actually in that process, one of the things that I was able to reconnect with that is specifically in terms of your work, Jamila, Dr. Codrington, is dance. Because I am someone that is not, in terms of traditional West African dance, I love it. I love the drum. It feels very healing to me. I'm not good at it. And so I've avoided it for a lot of my life. And then through breath work, I started going back. It was like almost like the drum was calling me. And I would just start going back to classes. And I remember the first time that I returned to class, because I had this clear message I needed to return. Very first time I returned to class, I was in a panic because I was just so terrible at it. And I called my friend on my way from class, and she started dying laughing. And she said, "So you gonna let your ego go?"
Yes.
And that's what pushed me to keep going back.
You know, it's so interesting, Dr. Ojelade, that you share that personal experience, because I think it will probably resonate with a number of people, particularly women, where for many of us, we are focused on how we look doing certain things. And really, when you think about